My name is Klaus Rustel, and I'm doing 100 innovation keynotes in 100 days. Today's number 79, and today I'm going to talk about remembering COVID-19 as an innovation challenge. Now, I'm going to start on February 4th, 2021, at bbc.com, because there was an interesting article there. And I just read this article, even though it's a bit later, but that's where we start. This article was written by a journalist called Ed Prideaux. And the title of it is How to Heal the Mass Trauma of COVID-19. Then continues, kind of the first words are, when the pandemic is over, how should we process the memories of what happened? Ed Prideaux discovers counterintuitive answers from the science of trauma. This is a very long article. It's also a very thoughtful one. So I'm going to focus on just one aspect of it, that of remembering. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat. It's a quote by Winston Churchill. It's also a very good quote. There's a bonus chip from Churchill, by the way. He hasn't said this, but I'll say it for him. If you want to be remembered, write in quotable ways. Churchill, very good at that. Now this, we recognize this. This is COVID-19. This is kind of the symbol. This is what we know it looks like. This is the bad thing that we're all right now dealing with. This is March 24, 2021. Let's do status for a moment. According to worldometers.info, we right now have roughly 125 million cases, or have had. 2.7 million deaths, 21 million active cases, give or take a few. 3% of those who've been hit by COVID are dead. Terrible numbers, terrifying stuff. The U.S. leads in absolute numbers with 556,924 deaths, according to this statistic. It's more than World War I, World War II, and Vietnam combined. That's a lot. The UK, 126,284 deaths. That's about a third of what they lost during World War II. Now, the sharp observer will also say, but did the British lose a bit more during World War II than the Americans did? They did. They were a bit closer to the action, but a third of the dead of World War II is still a staggering number. Denmark, 2,405. Much smaller country, much smaller numbers. And still, this is a little bit more than we lost in World War II. When it comes to people who took on this uniform and were Nazi volunteers, especially on the Eastern Front. There are many sides to each story. Now, of course, I should mention that more than 3,000 Danes died during the occupation of Denmark, so the total number is something around the 6,000 or so, if we include those who died volunteering for the Allied Merchant Marines. Bottom line, there's a reason I mention these numbers. We're good at remembering war. And why? Well, because we like clear starts. We like clear ends. Wars have both. It starts on this day. It ends on this day. Sure, there may be some complexities, but usually there's a clear start and a clear end. There's not always clear causes. It may look like that. Politicians may try to say that. But usually once you start digging into wars, there's a ton of stuff under the surface. But clear endings, clear starts. We like heroes, and war is great at producing them. We like villains, not necessarily to hang out with, but in our storytelling, in our remembrance, villains are powerful. We're not going to forget Hitler anytime soon. That's for damn certain. We like battles. We like strategies. We like events. We like things you can point to and say, this, the D-Day landings, the Battle of Gallipoli, the Ides of March. We like events. Most of all, war is easy to describe as a heroic struggle. And this goes even in a country that the Germans themselves called Flødeskumsfronten, the whipped cream front. This was Denmark under the Second World War, because for the Germans it represented a chance to go and be an occupying power in a place where things were actually, on average, better off than in Germany themselves. So that was the name for Denmark during the Second World War, the whipped cream front. Now, very importantly, I'm not saying the occupation of Denmark wasn't terrible. I really don't want to experience that. Not at all. But I'm saying compared to a lot of other places, it was pretty mild, and we still talk about it in this heroic way. It was certainly no Russia. That is for certain. That was 1940 to 1945, though, the occupation of Denmark. Let's jump a little bit further back in time. Let's go back to 1918. Because in 1918, a big event ended with somewhere between 15 and 22 million deaths. And I think this figure in itself says something so terrible and so kind of about how the real world is. Was it 15 million who died? Was it 22? That's a staggering 7 million difference. We're, of course, talking about the Great War, or as it later would be known, World War I. But in 1918, it was the Great War. Nobody called it the First World War and thought, we're ready for the second soon. No, it was the war to end all wars. Didn't really work that way. Now, there was another event in 1919, that caused 50 million deaths and more. So here we have the Great War, 15 to 22, and here we have this other event, 50 plus million deaths. It's called the Forgotten Flu, amongst many things. Now, why is it called that? Because we'll get to that. 1957, 1.1 million deaths globally. The H2N2 virus, very inelegantly named the Asian flu. Because let's take the biggest continent on Earth and just say, that's the name. Not like the Bangkok flu, or as some people have tried to dub the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, that at least has something to do with, just say like, it's Asia, all of Asia, the Asian flu. This is not going to hurt stereotyping at all. No. Why do we think that? This was 1957, 58. This is a different world. The Asian flu, 1.1 million dead. 1968, 1 million dead. H3N2 virus. This, I couldn't find some fancy name for it, but I'm sure somebody called it the other people's flu, something like that. We're human, right? But back to Prideaux's article. These numbers I also mentioned for a reason. That is that 1957, there's a researcher he quotes, says, we completely failed to learn the lessons of 1918. Take a look at this. In 1957, we failed to learn the lessons of 1918. Obviously, 1968, we failed to learn the lessons of 1957, and now we're here, 2020, 2021. Have we failed to learn the lessons of both 1918, 1957, and 1968? It seems we're doing pretty well on that score. Now, one part of this, and this is something I really, really found fascinating, is the lack of collective memory. It's the lack of pointing this and saying this was a thing. Because there's no clear start. When did the COVID-19 virus start? Was it in January 2020? Was it in March when most countries locked down, or at least many countries locked down? I say here with my Eurocentric view of the world, because honestly, I don't know when Senegal locked down. I don't know when New Zealand locked down. There's no clear start. There's no clear end. It's at least not in sight anytime soon. Some countries, it feels like it's almost over. Others, not so much. There's a surprisingly clear cause. Most, even the crazy conspiracy theorists, will say there was some sort of thing that happened in China, whether it was lab developed, I don't think it was, or it was because of wet markets, it at least originated there. Now, of course, some people will say, no, it originated in New York, and they're trying to put you into 5G water with Bill Gates. Yeah. But apart from those people, there's surprisingly clear cause. We still debate it. Why it happened, should it happen again, all this. But it's pretty simple to pinpoint, like, this is where, and then things happen. There are few heroes. And with that, I don't mean there aren't individual heroes. There are plenty of heroes, frontliners, people who are doctors, people who are in logistics, people who get to work every day in supermarkets and make sure other people have food. There are plenty of heroes in this conflict. But a lot of them don't feel heroic when we talk about them. Yes, a frontline doctor braving the risk of death to care for patients who are literally dying in the hallways, that's heroic. That we understand as a hero. Somebody choosing to help by sitting at home and mail ordering instead, not super heroic. Necessary, yes, but not super heroic. And there are even fewer villains. Yes, I know we talk about people like, so they took their private jets to Lyon and then they did a private party. Oh, those terrible people. Yeah, that's bad. But did they drop a nuclear bomb? Did they order somebody gassed? Did they rape Nanking? Not really. many fewer heroes and a lot fewer villains, which also makes for bad memories. There were people who made mistakes, sure. There are people who are going to be criticized by history for their handling of this, some more than others. But it's not like the place is filled, or the COVID stories filled with villains. No battles. No, like there was the Battle of Berlin, where we beat the disease after 3 days. It's not like that. It's a bigger thing. It's a longer thing. It's a marathon. The strategies, of course, are there, but they're boring. There's something that was called the hammer and the dance. I read this article a long time ago when it was all starting, and that was cool. First you had the hammer. You tried to squash COVID by lockdown, like blah, 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 blah. And then you had the dance, where you were trying to kind of keep it happening, but not happening too fast, reopening, but not reopening too fast. That had something. But most of the stuff, it's not, we're going to invade Normandy. It's not, we're going to focus on strategic bombing. It's not even, we're going to promote democracy in the occupied Iraq. The strategies are not super interesting, and that means people don't really care. What we've come down to find out is we should wear masks and we should wash our hands. When a conflict, a global conflict, if we look at it that way, is mainly won by washing our hands and wearing masks in public places, it's strategy. It's not that interesting. Sadly, and that makes it hard to remember. There are few events, there are few things we can point to and say, this. There's some super spreader events. There's some, yes, the South Koreans did this and started doing it. But there are very few kind of events that catch our attention. There's some weird thing with a cruise ship off an American coast, and Donald Trump famously said, I don't want them to count the cruise ships as part of our numbers, because if we just ignore them, we have better numbers. That was an event. You might also say it was a villain, but there are very few of these, and events make things easier to remember. Most of all, more importantly than all this, war is easy to describe as a heroic struggle. For many of us, the pandemic really hasn't been. We've watched Joe Exotic and Tiger King, and we've actually had our kids trying to say, play with me, Daddy, instead of working. Now, I know reality is more than Netflix and working with your kids. There's much more to it. A lot of it is complex, but this is the simple stories we're talking about. There are few trenches, and resistance isn't heroic. Resistance is staying at home, washing your hands, and being responsible, going one parent to shop instead of two. It's not heroic. It's not something where you can say, grandkids, when the COVID-19 situation happened, grandfather stayed at home, social distanced, and watched his hands, because he'd washed them so much they needed watching. It's not the same as bombing a railroad or doing an underground protest movement. It's just not. So how do we remember this? If it doesn't come easy, what do we do? Well, what can you do? You, me, us. I saw a suggestion, and first I laughed, and then I thought, that is brilliant. Suggesting a day off, call it Pandemic Memorial Day, call it Corona Day, call it anything. I think Corona Day might get to be too big a boost for people drinking Corona beers in 20 years, but for the moment, forget that. If there's a day off, a national holiday, maybe even a global day off, where we don't celebrate Corona, but we remember it, that would be a hell of a way to keep it in our minds, because we'd keep telling stories, we'd keep kind of inventing rituals, we'd keep ascribing meaning to it. So suggesting a day off, for me, it's talking to these guys in the Danish Parliament. That is something that matters. That's something that would actually, I think, make a huge difference. So that's an idea. Suggest a day off. Talk with politicians. It might seem like a far-out idea, but there are more far-out ideas out there that have actually become reality. Promote mass remembrance. If you're not looking at this from a political level, but more from, let's say, a company level or community level, this, May the 4th be with you, a Star Wars initiative created by people who love Star Wars. It might be cheesy, it might be cheeky, it might be unknown for many people, but you can be damn sure that for every year where May the 4th is a thing, a Star Wars thing, It's going to keep Star Wars in that collective memory. It can be thought of as silly, but it's also effective. You can show others you remember. One of the traditions in Denmark that I really love from a design standpoint is that when it comes to remembering the liberation, the Danish liberation during World War II, you put candles in the windows. That's it. You put a candle in the window to show you remember that struggle, you remember those who fell, you remember those who fought. Very simple, but super powerful. You can tell stories. And here I didn't have an interesting thing, so I just copied some graphic from somewhere. Stories of Corona. Tell the stories to the people who weren't there, to the people who were there. Keep this alive. And you can create rituals about it. Now, what I'm going to show you now, full disclosure, this that you're going to see in a moment has nothing to do with Corona. It has nothing to do with religion. It is a small, silly video that was produced by our former video team at my old company, Joe Larp Studios. And when I saw it, I died laughing. And I thought, I wish I someday have a reason to use this. And I didn't. And now I have it. So now you're going to see it. And just know, this was just created as a fun, small thing internally in a company. But when I get a chance to use it, I am. There, we're back. Sorry. I've been sitting on that, wanting to use it for something. It's called The Church of Jeff and the Holy Avocado, or something like that. I love my old film crew. They did fun stuff. Segue to the more serious stuff. Segue to Churchill. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Now, that's where we started. That's where I'm also going to end on this. Because if there's one space where there's massive room for innovation, where there's massive room for new thinking, it's learning how to remember history. Because we seem to be doing the same stupid shit again and again and again. So if you take one thing away from this, it should be how we remember COVID-19 is going to be critical for how we deal with this sort of situation in the future. And future pandemics will come. There's a lot of agreement on that from people smarter than me. And what you can do, well, can actually be part of that. Especially if you're willing. With that, thank you for listening.